Welcome to another episode of Homeschool Moms Unfiltered. This is our book club today. So I'm your host, Amanda, and my bibliophile co-host is.
Hello, I'm Meagan.
So we are your source for messy, imperfect homeschool community and hopefully advice.
Talk about messy. I don't know
Yeah.
if you're watching on the video. When Amanda said book club episode, I went, oh shit, I forgot my book. It's in my bed. Okay. So yeah, living up to the messy and imperfect. There'll be a little editing pause in a few minutes when I go grab my book. But yeah, there we are. So we are definitely not proclaiming to be perfect. But anyway, we are your book club friends. We are a low-key book club, as you can tell by the fact that I forgot to bring my book to book club. You can either read along with us, or you can tune in and listen to our digest version that we come on here and chat about every single Thursday. Either way, we don't judge. We are not about that here. So what are we about, you might ask? Well, so glad you asked. We believe that love is love, Black Lives Matter, no human can be illegal on stolen land, and men who think that a female astronaut needs like 9,000 tampons to go to space for a week have no business regulating our bodies.
Yeah, exactly. There are enough problems in the world. Let's leave my uterus out of it, okay?
Mine too.
Right. Yeah, exactly. But it is nice to know that you can find secular, progressive homeschoolers out in the wild. It can be hard to find your people because, let's be real, that religious homeschool contingency is so loud. Like, so loud.
So loud. Holy cow. Right? All right. So book club. We are currently slowly reading Debbie Reber's book, Differently Wired. We are working our way through the tilt in the second half of the book and really taking our time with them. I mean, so many of our community members and listeners are neurodivergent themselves, parenting/homeschooling neurodivergent kids, the works, right? And there's just so much meat in this book that it would be a shame to rush through them. Like there's no deadline, there's no finish line. So let's just marinate in it and enjoy the conversation and learn and grow.
Yeah, I'm not sure I'm going to marinate, but I'm definitely here for a while. So if this is your first book club and you just happen to stumble upon our podcast, feel free to hop back like, I don't know, a half a dozen episodes or something, because we've been working on this book for a while. But these tilts that we are covering are basically like a checklist of things that you can do to improve your relationship with your kiddo, right? It should help make your days a bit smoother, reduce everyone's anxiety, and just so much more, right? They're meant to be these fairly small-ish and, for the most part, bite-sized things to implement.
Yeah. So if you listened to last week's episode, you'll know that we had great intentions. We were going to cover tilts 4, 5, and 6, and then we ran out of time. So today we will be starting with tilt 6 with the earnest goal of covering 6, 7, and 8. So I'm going to pause, grab my book, and we shall dive in.
Okay, so tilt 6 starts on page 134, definitely in the printed book and possibly in the Kindle book. And it's called Let Your Child Be on Their Own Timeline. And it just starts with this quote at the very top. It says, optimist, someone who figures that taking a step backward after taking a step forward is not a disaster, it's a cha-cha. And that's by Robert Brault. We know I'm terrible with names, so I'm just going to put that out there. I think that's probably what it is. I just liked this. I don't necessarily think of myself as an optimist, but I was like, oh, this is for sure true. And my husband was like, So there's that.
So he's definitely not qualifying as an optimist.
No,
Maybe.
no, he's very much not the optimist in the family. That for sure.
I do like that. And then on 134, continuing with optimism, there's a visualization here. I find visualizations very calming and very reassuring. So on 134, she's talking about a parent that she worked with at some point, and the parent says, I pictured Sadie's life up until now as a conveyor belt that was moving too fast for her. Then I pictured us lifting her off of it and placing her on the ground where she needed to be at that moment and where she could walk on her own from there. And I love a visualization. To me, they're just very, very powerful. Then on 135, we both have some notes. The section is called The Importance of Measuring Up. And I think your notes come first.
Yeah, it does. I guess I went through I'm gonna put this out there. I went through and made sure that we were lined up better on 7 and 8, but I guess I forgot to look at 6. So sorry. And thanks for hanging with us. So for me, I just like the very first thing that she mentions under the importance of measuring up is APGAR scores, which to me, like that just seemed really weird. Anyone who doesn't know what an APGAR score is, like when a baby is first born, there's a scale of 0 to 10 for a few different things that they look at and check. Like my kiddo had terrible APGAR scores because he was completely unresponsive and was like immediately whisked out of the room to be taken care of by specialists. Like I don't really like what the score means. Nothing. I was a little lost on like why we care about APGAR scores other than like making sure that like the specialist is there to make sure your baby starts breathing and crying when they're supposed to. Like I don't know. I was just like that's I get it for the most part, right? I do get it, but like that just seemed like a weird place to start. Like they should be able to like figure things out on a scale in the medical community, like especially like, are they breathing? No, we should check that.
Right.
Is their breathing
Yeah.
distressed? Like,
That would be an important one.
yeah.
I've had 3 kids. No one ever told me what their APGAR scores were, and I never thought to ask. It was just like not a thing. And I had one who was born in distress, and even then, it wasn't like you might think like, oh well, if they were very typical deliveries, like no one would have cared, to share that information. But I had one who wasn't, not as dire as your situation, but still, you would think like she was as purple as like the Kool-Aid pitcher in like the old cartoons when he would like run through the brick wall, right? Like I would think that impacted her APGAR score, but no one shared it. Um, Fun fact, if we're talking about APGAR scores, Dr. Virginia APGAR is the one who created that score. And she is in our Women in Medicine unit study that we have about
Mhm.
teachers pay teachers. So I love highlighting badass female physicians. So that's where we got APGAR scores from. Thank you very much.
I should have looked at that unit study a little more closely because I didn't know that. I do. I look at all of them. I read them all, I promise, but apparently I don't remember that part.
I don't retain them all.
Apparently I don't retain it all. Just keeping it real. So let's see. She does go on in this like measuring up thing. She's talking about the different developmental milestones. And for me, this did like hit home. So we had this kind of interesting situation, right? We had decided that we were going to do IVF. And in order to do IVF, our clinic required that we had pretty extensive genetic testing, my husband and I. So we went and had the genetic testing, and it came back. Even though I'm white and he's Asian, we both had a very unusual, like fairly rare gene for a specific type of hearing loss. We had the exact same gene. So they were like, like you should go get genetic counseling around this before you do anything. And we were kind of like, well, we already have a child. And he was born in Belgium where they don't do the same sort of newborn hearing testing that they do in the United States. And that's one of the main reasons we have all of the papers and we know what his APGAR score was, right? Because we had got them from the hospital and like trying to figure out like if they had for sure done this, whatever. Anyway, the geneticist says, for the just to be safe, you should probably take him to hearings, specialty hearing testing, go to the university hospital, the children's hospital and do the full on hearing testing. Okay, fine. So we took him, we got the appointment. He did fine with the hearing test, but it's a pretty long, involved, like it was more than an hour of us all being there and then talking with the person because there's a few different types in a booth and then in a regular room and all this stuff. And he was very well behaved. And there was only one point where he got like my attention or my husband's attention and, whispered to one of us that he needed to go to the bathroom. And so I think it was my husband that got up and took him to the bathroom and came back. And we had the appointment. I was like, wow, he did a really good job. Like, I'm positive we need to take him to the park and like let him burn off some energy because he was like so well behaved during that appointment. Come to find out during the appointment, they were like, he's not speaking enough. There's a problem. And we got a referral to First Five, which is like one of those programs that helps with kids who are behind where they're supposed to be. And I was like, well, I think that seems silly and not accurate, but I also don't want to be one of those jerks that's like, no, there's nothing with my parent, and like, or with my child. And I refuse to like take any recommendations or referrals, right? So I'm like, okay, fine, we'll go. So we go to the first intake thing, right? And it's a shorter one. And during that one, they're like, oh no, his talking is fine, but he has problems with his fine motor skills. And I'm like, okay, I haven't really noticed a problem with his fine motor skills, but like, all right, like, what does that mean? And they're like, well, that means that you have to come back for a longer assessment. I'm like, okay, so schedule us for the longer assessment. Again, I'm doing this like, well, I don't really know if I buy into it, but like, I'm not going to be the jerk that refuses to listen to their concerns around him hitting developmental milestones. So we go back for the longer, like hour-long assessment. And they're like, no, 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 his fine motor skills are fine. His gross motor skills are the problem. And I'm like, I don't like this kid has been riding a bike and climbing the kids' playground equipment. Like he started walking at 9 months. I'm not sure that there's a big problem with gross motor skills, like, and so I was kind of like, just give me the information. Let me see, like they're like, you can come to a once a week class, on Fridays at this time and blah, blah, blah. I'm like, okay, well, just give me the information. And then I went to our pediatrician and my pediatrician was like, what in the world? Like this whole that no, everything is fine. No. If you want a free class, go for it. But if you don't and it's an extra stressful thing for you, like none of those things are a problem. He's fine on all of those, but that like man, as a new parent, especially if it's your first, those milestones and that like you can get really hung up on it and really anxious and worried. Like, well, they said, or like, what does that mean?
I felt like the way that story was going, that you were going to be like, so 5 years later, next week, we have an appointment at the such and such clinic. Right?
They sound like it, right? I mean, because none of those appointments happen as fast as they should, right? It's always like you're waiting and you're waiting.
Yeah. Like at this point, we're assessing how quickly his toenails grow because they're concerned.
Too fast for the record.
Yeah. I like that, right? But yeah, I mean, there's a thing here on that same page with the importance of measuring up. And it says, as parents, we like to know how our child fits in. And I feel like, yes, it's that thing, especially when you're a newer parent, when you're newer to homeschooling, when you're in a very traditional education system where everything is on a metric and a scale and all that kind of stuff. But I feel like the longer that you live in the homeschooling world and kind of try to shed some of those things that have become norms, quote unquote, you kind of can ditch a little bit of that if you're mindful about it and work on it, because I don't really care where my kids fit in and measure up. Like they're wildly ahead in some stuff. They're probably quote unquote behind in other things, right? But the things that they're quote unquote behind in are probably not things that are going to be their focus in life, etc. Right. So, I'm like, I'm not worried about it.
Well, and that dovetails in perfectly with the next comment for me, which is on page 136, right? Because she's just pointing out, and it's true, and we've talked about it in the regular podcast before, that in a traditional education model, it's all about fixing a child's deficits and ignoring their strengths, right? And that idea that like, it's too bad, like, sure, there's nothing wrong with helping support your child if they have an area of deficit, and like giving them the tools and accommodations, and keeping those things in mind. But there's also a lot to be said for encouraging strengths, like you're strong in this, like, let's do that. It doesn't have to just be like, well, you're strong in this, so we're going to ignore that and make sure that you get there in these other areas too. Like it doesn't have to be that way.
Mhm. Yeah. I think it's on that same page because, page numbers. But if there's a thing in here where Debbie Reber's talking about when she signed Asher, her kiddo, up for a program, and she thought she had vetted the program effectively. And long story short, it doesn't go the way she had hoped it would. But there's a line in here that says one of the instructors had experience with kids on the spectrum. Now, this is a while ago, and I think at that point she was probably living in Europe, which is a little bit different, and all of that, right? So today that might even sound a little bit different if she were to vet a program today. But I just wanted to put out there, like, if you're somebody who's brand new to this world of diagnosis or still dipping your toe in and like doing assessments and waiting for feedback and all that kind of stuff, for me, as a parent who has had diagnoses for the kids for years, someone who has experience with kids on the spectrum is not a green light for me, right? That's like the tip of the iceberg to ask a lot of questions. There are a lot of dangerous people out there who have experience with neurodivergence, people that are not affirming, do not feel that our kids are perfect the way they are, that are looking to fix our kids, that are sending our kids really negative messages, whether they mean to or not. So if you're new in that world and you're ever like, how do I find who's a safe person for my kids? Like, come ask in our Facebook group, come have a coaching session, like do something. But someone having, and I'm not faulting Debbie Reber, like she did what she knew was best, right?
She
Like
did the best she could, with what she had.
She vetted the program, all that kind of stuff. But just like as a heads up, like experience with autism is not like, oh, great, my kid will be in excellent hands. It could be exactly the opposite, truly. So there's many more questions to be asked there.
Yeah. And so that part is actually under this section called the problem with arbitrary timelines. And you're right, it was the next thing.
Okay. And then I have it on page 136, but it's under the section called Respecting Unique Timelines Benefits Kids. I'll be honest, typically when we talk about a study that we read about in the book, I usually go read the study before I come to book club. Totally haven't done that. And I've had 2 weeks to do it because we were supposed to do this till last week and we pushed it to this week. Still haven't done it. I do apologize. It's been a little crazy here, but that's just life. But anyway, there's a thing here that says a recent study, and recent, again, the book is a bit older, right? So it doesn't have a year, but recent isn't recent to 2025. Let's just say that. Okay. A recent study by the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation found that when students are given the opportunity to learn at their own pace and in their own way, quote unquote, these methods drove students' math and reading scores up significantly. In fact, their impact was larger than those found in 95% of other educational intervention studies, end quote. So I'm an unschooler. Like, of course, I was going to highlight that quote and be like, hello, right? Was I going to let that go? No. And it's not to say that you have to be an unschooler to do that, right? Like, I know your kiddo has tons of say in the curriculum that you use. And if he doesn't like something, he can be like, veto, right? So it's not to say, right? Yeah. So it's not to say you have to be an unschooler to experience that benefit, but it just spoke to me as an unschooler. So I figured I'd bring it to book club.
1 week we should read and highlight the things we think the other person is going to pull out. Wouldn't that be hilarious? It would be.
Yes.
I think it would be so fun to be like,
did you totally know I was bringing that to book club?
Yeah, there have been several things that I'm like, she's gonna like. And when I looked through the notes earlier today to just make sure I knew what we were talking about, I'm like, yeah. I don't have any, or like typing things up. I don't have anything in these pages. I bet Megan's gonna have a ton because I was like, yep, totally. Okay. So then we move on. There's a section called Notice the Compare and Despair Cycle. Neither one of us put too much in that, but she does have this nice long list of things that we often compare, right? Like those it's on page 140 and it's like, they just come up over and over, right? So there's like tying shoes, brushing teeth independently, riding a bike, expressing empathy and compassion towards others, being a good sport, packing their own lunch or making their own meals, buying something from a store by themselves, reading a novel from start to finish, writing an essay, doing their homework without reminders, staying home by themselves, doing their own laundry, safely crossing the street, getting themselves to school or to a friend's house by themselves, memorizing their address and phone number, finding their way home from a regularly visited location, taking care of a younger sibling. Like, just this idea, there are all of these things that we are so quick to compare and look at, like, well, this person's kid is already doing that. Like, why isn't mine? Or sometimes we're guilty of doing the like, well, my kid can already do that. Why can't theirs? Like, let's be real. And that question is like, how much of it really matters? Big picture. We brought this up in a previous episode. If they're tying their shoes at 6 versus tying them at 16, like, what does it matter? Are they in a position where they have to have tie up lace shoes? Or, like, I would think in this day and age, that's not really a thing, like there are lots of options and it's not just grandpa Velcro, right? Like there are lots of options. But then I also wondered how much of this belief that a kid can't do something is actually based more in fear, right? We had in a previous episode, we talked a lot about the fear and how a lot of things are the parent being fearful for their child or having this fear around the way their child is developing and not actually being based in the reality of things, but based in this kind of like fear, anxiety spiral cycle. And I'm going to guess that a lot of times, more often than not, it's fear based when someone says their kid can't do something more than like the fact that their kid can't actually, like doesn't actually act the way that they think they should kind of thing.
I would agree with that. Yeah.
Let's see. I think I have the next one too, just on page 142. So it's at the very end of a new section called Challenge Those Timeline Beliefs. And there's just a quote that, like, for me, I was like, I like that. So she says, oh, yeah, that's right. what do I need to do to just help him live to his fullest potential? And I was like, really, isn't that the only, like, if we stop worrying about the timelines, if we stop worrying about, like, well, he needs to be able to do this and he has to be able to do that and everyone else can do blah, blah, blah. So he should be able to as well. Like, if we can find a way to just constantly reframe it, like, what do I need to do just to help him live to his fullest potential, whatever that is? I we would probably all be so much happier in our parenting and personal life and all kinds of things, right?
Mm-hmm. I like it. I like it when you start off with what section we're into because my page numbers are so off that I'm like, I have no idea where we are. I miss like the first 2 to 3 sentences of everything that you say, just trying to figure out what page we're on. Like, I don't know why this Kindle book is so out of whack. Okay. So, okay. See, me figuring out where we are. Even my own page numbers are messed up. Be prepared to deflect the doubters is a section that comes up a little while later. And she talks about the usual, right? I mean, we did a whole episode on homeschool backlash and naysayers and all that kind of stuff. And she's got a thing in here that says, here are some simple, clear, and kind responses to have at the ready. And they're nice things like, he's focusing on developing other skills right now. Or, thanks for your concern. We've got it covered. And I would just like to kind of give you a permission slip to know that you only quote unquote owe people kind responses for so long, right? Like at the end of the day, they're your kids. And if you have a friend, a relative, a neighbor, a cashier at the supermarket, I had that experience based upon the way I just said that, right? who feels like it's their position to share feedback on your child's development or your parenting, right? Like, I'll be friendly. I'm the gentle parent between us, right? I'm going to be friendly and I'm going to be like, oh, okay, but only for so long. And then it's going to be like, we're done here. And so you don't owe that to anyone. I will typically do it in the beginning just because that's my personality and that's kind of my nature. Like between us, I'm always like, let's give them the benefit of the doubt, right? Like, and it's just like, here we go. We're giving people the benefit of the doubt again. Standard response.
Yep.
But so I will be kind at the beginning, but after a while, my kindness will wear thin. And if you get to that point, you're not a bad person. It's no one else's freaking business what you do with your kids. The end.
Yeah.
No, I'm all about it. So just so you know, if you reach that point, you're good. You're okay. In fact, come and tell us about it, right? Show up in our group and be like, I told the Publix cashier that she could go fuck herself today. And come tell us about it. We'll cheer for you.
We will. Yep. Yes. All right. So we both have similar things, right? So we're wrapping up this tilt and she's talking about the importance of scaffolding and using scaffolding for success. And I really liked that, right? And we found it really important in our house from everything for little things to big things. I don't know if you have this in your own home, but sometimes my parenting partner, especially, tends to assume that kiddo will just know how to do things, right? And so for anyone who's just tuning in and hasn't been listening, we live in a condo. It's a quite large condo building complex, right? And so generally, if you live in that kind of housing, on your floor, there is a trash chute. And it's in its own separate room. So you have to be able to open the door and go in and open the trash chute, put the garbage in. Sometimes you've got to give it a little push to make sure it slides down from the opening. And, and that's all there is to it. It's not terribly complicated. But we had this thing where, again, my parenting partner was like, kiddo should start taking the garbage out. And kiddo was like, ah. And I was like, you can't just say, like, you've got to take the garbage out, And he was like, why not? It's simple. I'm like, of course it's simple because you're a grown up. Like, like the first week, you should have him go with you to go do it, right? Because it's on the other side of the building. It's quite a far walk. So there was also this like getting over, like, you can't see our front door from where you have to go to throw the garbage away. So go with them a few times. Maybe it'll take more than a few times for them to be comfortable to go that far. Then, the next step is go with them, but have them carry the garbage, so that you're there to help with it. Like, but build on these skills, it could even just be rolling your garbage down to the curb. If you haven't shown your kid how to pull it back, they might not know how to pull back your garbage can so it rolls more easily. They're just like, oh, it rolls. And then they go and try to push and they're like, it doesn't roll. What does happen? Like, this is not, like just these kinds of things that we take for granted because We learned somewhere along the way, and you can force your kid to learn the hard way, but you can also build in the scaffolding and show them the easier way, right? The supported way so they feel really good about themselves when they succeed.
Hmm. Yeah. And I made a note of that, right? So I had a kiddo who talks now, but was there, I mean, just brutally, brutally shy and is also introverted. There's a huge difference between introversion and shy. And sometimes you can be one or the other or both.
Yep.
Kiddo is/was both. Um, and so, yeah, we would go out and people would say to her, like a server would come up to the table and be like, what do you want to eat? And when she just looked like, I mean, panic, like extreme panic and stare at me. And I'm like, you know what you want to eat. You have to say, I can't say it. And logically, you're like, what are they going to do? Eat you? But that's it. And so kiddo loves Chipotle. And so we kind of had this progression of like, I am not ordering for you at Chipotle anymore. You want to eat Chipotle? You need to order Chipotle. And so we started out with like standing there like a stunned deer. And then we went to mouth moving, but no sound coming out. Then it was like barely sound coming out. Right. And I have a photo, it pops up every year on my Facebook of her standing there, and she was standing in like this super relaxed pose, talking to the person ordering her food. And I was like,
Mhm.
it took us forever to get there, but we got there. Right. And now she
Yeah.
can just do the thing for the most part, but there's still things, right? Like we just moved and my kiddo was an artist and she needed to find studio space in our new city that we're in. And she and I have been working together for quite some time to drum up leads and try to find space and all that kind of stuff. And so we went to this one place like a week and a half ago. And, I was like, I can't speak for you. You're only 15, almost 16, but if this is going to be your space, I can't speak for you here, right? You have to walk in and say, I'm looking for artist space, like, because you're the one who's going to be dealing with these people and navigating this environment. So she's like, so what am I saying? And I'm like, okay, no problem. So here's what you're
Mhm.
going to say. Here's how you're going to start the conversation. You might expect them to reply with X, Y, or Z. If they say this, you could say that. If they say this, you can say that, and just kind of like pull through those things. But yeah, like a lot of us, not everyone, there's plenty of adults who struggle with that. And that's of course perfectly reasonable. But for me, I can just walk into that situation and be like, so here's what I was thinking. And I had a question for you. Right. Like,
Mhm.
and I mean, I'll walk in with some pretty bold questions sometimes and be like, because if
No.
you don't ask, right, and I tell the kids that I'm like, the worst somebody can do is say no. Right.
Yeah.
And so I'll walk in and be like, I have a ridiculous question. Do you mind? And it kind of like lowers people's defenses and you feel less stupid asking a ridiculous question then. But a lot of adults don't feel comfortable doing that, let alone kids who haven't built up that level of social confidence yet. So we definitely need to kind of put those steps in there, right?
Yeah, that's it.
So
Steps, supporting, all of that jazz. All right,
yeah.
so this tilt wraps up with again this start now box. Every tilt has a start now. If you read the whole thing and you're a little overwhelmed, or if you were like, I want the takeaways, but I don't have the time to read all of the stuff, go to the very back. It says start now. And this one says, make a list of skills your child is struggling with and commit to working with your child to improve on those skills with love, patience, and no preconceived timeline. And I like that. I will say, if we're talking about low lift, maybe make the whole list and then decide to work on one or two.
Yeah.
You know, don't be like, okay, so I've got a list of 15 things that we need to work on, and we're going to practice all of them today. Like, that's a surefire way to make sure this doesn't work.
It would not go well.
No. And it might be one of those things you keep the list somewhere handy, and once a month you add in another one to try that you're going to work on. And I'll have that same advice later in the episode, assuming we get through all the tilts. So there you go.
There you go. All right. So speaking of scaffolding and support, which we just spent so much time talking about, right? Before we head into our new tilt, let's talk support for us. All
Mhm.
right. You have decided to take on your child's education, which even though homeschool is growing, we are still very much in the minority. Okay. The standard route is to walk your kid down the street or put them on a bus and send them off to school. You are in a large group, but it doesn't necessarily always feel large. You can oftentimes feel quite like in a sea all by yourself. So if you're anything like us, you can read the books, you can listen to the podcasts, you can ask questions, but the stakes are high, right? I mean, we're not going to sit here and say they're not. You're educating your kiddo. You're in charge of it all. You can do it. We know you can do it. But the stakes are high.
And if you mess it up, they're gonna go on social media and blast you. So we know it's a little nerve-wracking.
They'll be in that Reddit recovering homeschoolers thread or whatever it is, right?
Or the TikTok, there's a whole TikTok community of like, yeah, my parents homeschooled me and didn't teach me real science. My parents homeschooled me and refused to vaccinate me, like, yeah. So we get it. It's not easy.
Hey, I went to school and didn't get real science, so it happens. Or history, right? So it happens. But okay, so like you can do all the things, but sometimes you just want to share your exact scenario. I mean, we had something like that happen in our Facebook group the other day where Amanda posted something about like common questions. And somebody was like, Leah's questions come up all the time and people just keep still asking them. And I'm like, yeah, but for me, sometimes it's like, I know this question has been asked before, but there's a nuance to it that makes it unique to me. There's like this little bit that's unique to me or that's special about my kiddo or whatever. And everybody has that because no two families are operating the exact same way. And then you want to be able to ask follow-up questions to that exact scenario about how does this pertain to my life, my household, my kid, my journey, right? You are not alone. We totally get that. So we offer a few avenues for support. We offer a homeschool Q&A every month that's for our Patreon peeps. It's $12 a month. We try to make it as affordable as possible because then from the $12, Apple wants their piece and Patreon wants their piece and all that stuff, right? So we tried to do our best considering all of that. That you can attend our Q&A and our social and get a unit study every month, all for that $12. And there's a ton of stuff happening over there. But you can come to the Q&A. We had ours the other day. We talked about math programs, dual enrollment, balancing schedules. I mean, we just had a really great meeting with the parents who came. It was really awesome. Mm-hmm. And then if you really want to dig in, is you can sign up with either myself or Amanda for one-on-one, or you can hang with both of us and do a two-on-one coaching session. There's a link in the show notes to access our calendar. There's a slew of options in our menu of coaching services. So come, whatever's on your mind, we will be happy to help. At the end of the day, support and peace of mind when you're taking on your kiddo's education is so essential. We want you to feel confident. We want you to feel like you've got a supportive community around you. All right, let's get back to our tilts. We are on tilt number 7. Look at us making progress. My page numbers are completely screwed up here, but I think I have the first comment. Am I right here, Amanda?
Yeah. So tilt 7 is called Become Fluent in Your Child's Language. And you've got the first comment on 1.5.
Okay. Thank you. So I just there was a quote here that says to be truly effective and understand our child, we must be fully committed and curious. And I just liked that, right? I mean, we all get it. There's no half-assing parenting if you want to really, really do it well. And then especially if you're homeschooling on top of it, right? It's yeah, it is pretty consuming and we totally get that. But I liked that quote as kind of the start.
Yeah, solid way to start off the tilt. So on 146, the first section is called Lost in Translation. And she tells this story about a big family dinner with a younger child, elementary age, who has ADHD. And it seems like in the middle of dinner, the kid just reached out and flipped over the container of milk. So it spilled all over the table, right? And of course, there's a very good chance that depending on my state of mind and my mood, I would be one of the people what the hell? What did you what's that freak out is there. But he had an aunt who was at the table who just happened to have the presence of mind to take a minute. And then she turned to him and said, "What were you trying to do?" And the kid explained that he saw his dad was going to need butter. And so he was proactively trying to reach for the butter to get it for dad. And brain and hand and arm, they just were not working the way they were supposed to. And instead he knocked over the milk, right? And I just thought, this is just such a good example. And I'd love to sit here and tell you that I'm always going to remember to ask what they meant to do. I'm not. Okay. I'm human. That's not going to be my first instinct. My first instinct is going to be whoa, what the hell happened? But remembering to take that step back and well, what were you trying to do? Because yeah, kids they're not, even if they knocked the milk over on purpose, it was probably because they were trying to get your attention because they'd been saying something and you were ignoring them and they weren't sure how else to get you to actually stop and address their urgent, immediate need they had. I mean, there's just so much there. It's very rarely malicious just to be malicious.
Yeah, they're not like cats who just knock things off countertops, right?
hide under bookshelves and swipe at you as you walk by. Like, that's not a kid. Yeah.
Yeah. This story stuck with me from the first time we read this book. When we got to it, I was like, oh, I remember this story, right? Because like you talked about your parenting partner and the garbage chute experience, right? And we've had these conversations too, where it's like, you know, parenting partner would get all fired up and I'm the gentle parent over there who's like, no, 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 right? And, you know, I would say, like, do you honestly think that's what that kid intended to do? Like, obviously not. Like, do you think that they feel good right now? So you racking on them isn't gonna help in that situation. Just back up. Let's
Mhm.
give it a second. Let's talk it through. At the end of the day, nothing has been irreparably damaged. Nobody died, right? Like, it's milk. It's a tablecloth. It's, you know, all of it's okay. It's all fixable just about all the time. Pretty much everything's always fixable. So like putting into perspective the consequence of what actually happened, it's not that big. It's okay.
Yeah, for sure. Okay, so then on the next page, actually, yeah, one on page 147, there's the gifts of fluency is the new kind of subheading. And I think at this point, we're all probably pretty familiar with this idea that like all behavior is communication. I'm not sure that you can be parenting a young child these days and not have heard that somewhere or read it in some article or something, right? So that's this idea. And she goes on to say, she has a quote: I venture to say that most of the time, we're not actually listening. We're too busy managing them, trying to problem solve in the moment, parenting them. And I just thought, it's so true. I think probably the vast, vast majority of the time things go off the rails. It's because the parent or the caregiver was doing exactly this, right? They were trying to manage the situation, they were trying to problem solve in the moment, but they forgot to just listen. And I think that's becoming, I would say, in previous generations, there was less of a focus on listening to kids. I mean, that famous saying, children are to be seen, not heard, wouldn't be famous if it wasn't a thing. And there was a big movement towards listening to your kids, but I do feel like there's a little bit of a movement back towards that older way of thinking. And so I just really encourage you to like stop and remember, like listening, actually really listening to what people are saying. It's important.
Yeah. I feel like that reversion is part of like our whole societal reversion as a whole,
Yeah.
right? I
Yep.
mean, there's a guy, he was doing like street interviews at some Trump rally, and he was like, when was America last great? Like when are we trying to go back to? And somebody would be like, oh, I mean, one guy gave like a very specific like month and year. I was like, oh, that's pretty random, right? You know,
I
but
spent a lot of time thinking about that.
yeah. You know, they say like 1920 or something, and it'd be like, oh, back when like women couldn't have bank accounts and women couldn't vote. And they were like, yes, yes, that's when it was
Mhm.
great.
Yeah.
Or somebody would say like the 50s. Oh, so you mean like when people of color couldn't vote and there were like lynchings happening? Oh, yeah, that's when okay. You just explained to us when we've been great, right? And
Mhm.
so I feel like that reversion might be part of our step towards greatness as it
Yeah.
was.
Yeah. There is that. Mhm.
Yeah. Okay. So then she's got a really fun thing in here. If you've got the book, if you don't, the book is amazing. If you don't have the book, there's a thing here on page 148, and it's like an Asher to Debbie dictionary. And so she talks about like my behavior and how Asher interprets it. And so there's just an example here, like going on a long walk in the park and allowing Asher to talk to his heart's content about his area of interest. And Asher's interpretation is like, my mom is interested in me and what I have to say. Right. And so she's kind of got all these other things. And then it works the other way too, where it's like Asher gets into his pajamas before dinner. And mom's like, oh, that means he's had a rough day. Right. It says he's had a
Mhm.
difficult day and he's looking for comfort and cuddles. So just that really being keyed in, tuned in, observing, listening, understanding, and really throwing yourself into that. But I really liked that example that was there.
I knew it. That would have been my Megan will like this. I'll need a different color tab for the things that I'm like that Megan
Yes.
was this.
So I thought of you the other day because we're reading in one of my book clubs that I teach. We're reading Salt to the Sea, and there's this one character in there that's just so horrendously annoying. And one of my students was like, I gave him his own tab color, and I'm out of tabs. It's like I was like, oh, that's so Amanda. I love it.
There are others like me. I'm not alone. Tabs are
I
a
know.
wonderful thing.
She was so cute about it. All right. Then on 149, we've got Remember, There's Always a Reason is our next section. And I just want to say she's got a thing in here. She references it quite a bit, The Explosive Child, which is a book by Dr. Ross Greene. And this book gets a lot of traction in groups when people are talking about neurodivergence and parenting and all that kind of stuff. Did you read that one, Amanda, when we read that in our other book club?
I did not read it in that book club. I had read parts of it before.
Gotcha.
It was one of those for me, like, some things are good food for thought. I think a lot of times with books, you get food for thought out of them, but not a book that I would have really recommended to other people.
Yeah, it wasn't my favorite. So she highlights in here this line from the book, which is kids do well when they can. And that is the one thing that I took from that book, which I thought I think I kind of already knew that, but I liked the phraseology of it, right? It was really succinct and it was really handy to just like have in your back pocket and be able to say like kids do well when they can. I liked that. Generally speaking, I read that book when I was at the end of my rope in a certain situation and I was looking for answers. And I don't mean this in a like, I'm so wonderful. I was already doing the stuff that was in the book. And so I got the book looking for help and looking for solutions because even though I was already doing those things, I was still at the end of my rope. And so we read it, a whole group of parents. And I think that was kind of the general consensus was like, it maybe at the time it was revolutionary, but now with parenting on TikTok and all these podcasts that are out and stuff, like I think maybe more people are already doing some of those things and it's less revolutionary. So I'm not saying don't read it. I mean, there might just be, like Amanda said, there might be like a little piece here or a little piece there that resonates with you, and it might be really impactful for you, right? Like there's a book that I read, it's on my bookshelf, Different by Sally Clarkson and Nathan Clarkson. And they're like uber Christians, missionaries to Africa, like this whole thing, like stuff that I do not jive with. But I read it and there was just this one section in it that rocked my world. So it might be something like that where the whole book isn't amazing for you. I wouldn't say don't read it, but for me, she references it a few times and I was just kind of like, okay.
I will say a lot of times with those kind of books for me, again, my parenting partner is not nearly as tuned in with all of the new ideas and things, right? Like he's on car forums and bicycle forums and motorcycle forums. He's not on a lot of parenting forums. He's not watching a lot of TikTok parenting videos or Instagram parenting videos. So a lot of times when I read a book like this, that for me is a lot of like, like not really new stuff. I'm not getting if there's a good section that I feel like really explains something that we've been struggling with or really explains our kiddo, maybe something specific we've got going on, it's an easy thing for me to put a tab in and hand it to him and be like, you should totally read this page, right? Like, I think, and then that way, because I could hand him a parenting book. He's never in our 11 years of having a child and 2 years of trying to have one, he's never read a parenting book I've given him, right? From cover to cover, but he will read things. He's just not going to sit down and read a whole parenting book. That's not his jam. That's not who he is. And so, when you can give a resource like that, right? Sometimes it comes across a little better than you being like, we've talked about the fact that we're going to do it this way. But you agreed and you're not doing it, like, no, this is why, right?
Yeah. I feel like we have a lot of parenting partner alignment today on some things. And I'm going to guess we're not alone, right? I'm going to guess that there's people listening to this who are like,
no,
yeah. They're sending it to their partner and being like, listen to 35 minutes in. It's not just me and you. It's not just me harping on you and telling you.
Yeah. I'm not nagging.
Exactly.
Okay. So she goes on shortly after that, like she goes into a story. It's on page 150. She tells a story about an elementary age kiddo who the teachers were frustrated with because he kept having huge meltdowns for no reason during recess. Okay. And the quote says, I don't know exactly how it happened, but at some point we started listening to the actual words our son was saying and believing them instead of just accepting others' interpretation of events. So when he'd tell us, he was trying to keep track of all the movements and words of every kid on the playground in order to predict what they were going to do next, and failing miserably, of course. My husband and I imagined how frustrating that would be and realized his having a meltdown suddenly and for no reason, quote unquote, was the teacher's interpretation, but not the actual reality. He was actually quite good at expressing why he was constantly falling apart at school. But pretty much everyone on his team was dismissive of his reasons. And I just thought that was such a great example, right? Like sometimes kids explain what they're doing, and for us, it seems like such a strange thing or such a far fetched way to be behaving that we're like, oh, yeah, yeah, that's, like, but if that's what they're really doing, like you have to, don't downplay it. Like, actually, again, that thing, like we talked about before, like, listen, just because it seems like a strange thing to do to you, or it seems like a wild, far-fetched thing, you're like, why would anyone be doing that? Like that's impossible. It's going to make your brain explode. Like, well, yes, that's actually exactly what's happening. It is impossible. And then his brain is exploding. And then teacher's like, that for no reason, like, yeah, I thought it was just a good analogy. Is not really right because it's an actual story, but yeah, a good story to help drive that point home.
Mhm. I liked it. 151. Okay, so we talked about Dr. Green, kids do better if they can. There's a thing in this little box on 151-ish that says pro tip, and it says personalize Dr. Green's statement. Kids do well if they can, and share it with educators and other adults in your child's world. For example, Asher would do better if he could. And that resounded even with me. And I'm already on board with that statement, but I was like, wow, rephrasing it in that way is really powerful. I really liked that rephrase where it was just like full stop, right? I had a kiddo who full stopped me like that. It was when he was younger. It's those, we talked about it, right? Like these parenting things that you think must be and all of that until you realize that it really doesn't matter. And my oldest kiddo wanted to bathe in bath water that I felt was like ice cold. And I don't think cold water makes you sick. I'm not like in that camp, right? Like I get the bacteria and viruses make you sick, right? Not bath water. But we lived in Miami. It wasn't like we were in like Minnesota, right? Like there was no danger of him like catching a chill. But in my mind, it was too cold to bathe your kid in, right? They say like stick your elbow and like all this stuff, right? And so he was older toddler and kind of beyond and whatnot. And we were constantly having this kind of like tug of war over the water temperature. And then finally, he just like very sharply looked at me and he said, I feel temperature differently than you do. And I was like, the end, right? I've never brought it up again. And so it's like sometimes like that rephrase where you're just like, oh, the end. I got it. Okay. I got it. That to me would do that. If somebody said that to me, I'd be like, I get it. He would do better if he could. Thank you very much. So I liked that. Then on 152, supposedly, there's a section here called Get to Know Your Child's Triggers. I made a list. Did you happen to make a list in this whole fun exercise, Amanda? Not to put you on the spot, but
I
I just
did
did.
not. I thought about it, but I didn't make a list. Like,
Yeah, I just,
no, yeah, like the thought about it, like thought through the exercise, not like I thought about it and then was like, screw that, I'm not making a list. It wasn't that bad.
yeah. Yeah, I mean, so she talked about Asher. Some of Asher's were unpredictabilities, situations where things didn't go the way he expected, having people place demands on him, right? And so I made some notes. Let me pull up notes in my Kindle here, right? So my kiddos were schedule changes, feeling like someone is upset with him or disappointed with him or like going to be angry with him, too much stimuli, and then not being able to understand something as quickly as he thinks he should, right? Because he's profoundly gifted. So then when something doesn't come quickly and easily, it's like I'm the dumbest person alive kind of reversal there. But I mean, we had that today. Like he bumped into something in a store and it was like a picture frame, like a display picture frame, and it popped apart. It was just two pieces of plastic. They popped apart. They could pop back together. It was not a big deal. And right away, I was like, oh, this is going to start quickly. Right. And I was like, it's okay. No harm. It's all good. We can totally fix it. And the lady was like, I'll fix it. And I was like, see, she can fix it. No problem. Because it was going to go downhill very fast if this, like, I broke this thing and I'm going to be in trouble, which is ironic because I'm a gentle parent. I don't yell. It's not like it's not a situation where the kid like cowers in the corner in fear, but that's just like his natural reaction. So yeah, I thought that was great. And it's interesting because I was editing the episode when we had Leah on last week and we were talking about Autism Acceptance Month and her experience as a parent of a profoundly autistic child. And she was talking about triggers for her kiddo and how that can completely rock their entire day. And I was kicking myself when I was editing, thinking I wanted to ask her, how on edge is she all the time? Does she find that she's moving through life consistently on the lookout for these things that will trigger her child because the chain reaction is so big that she tries to prevent it? Or is she kind of in this thing like, I don't have enough spoons to try and deflect all of that. We'll deal with it as it comes. So now I think I'm going to message her and ask her, and just for my own knowledge, because I find that it's gotten better as my kiddo's gotten older, but I was constantly in the deflecting position, right? And looking for things that were going to start the spiral. And it's exhausting. It's super exhausting.
Yeah, it is. Well, and she brings it up and she looks at it in different ways here. And I think the thing that's kind of hard with it is different kids have different triggers and they can be completely opposite from someone else you're talking with. Like, I did think about it from the respect that she's talking. She gives an example somewhere in this section. I don't think it's exactly where we're at, but she's talking about how they're going on a trip and she went through all of the things they were going to do on their trip and they got on the trip and he had no idea, right? He like hadn't listened or filed it away at all. And so she made this book and they went through it. She made it for him ahead of time with illustrations and all of this stuff. And then they took it with them and all of these kinds of things. And for me, I was thinking, like, I have the kiddo who I never tell him when we're getting together with other people or we're doing something fun until sometimes the morning of. Sometimes I'll tell him the night before, but usually it's the morning of. I'm like, oh, hey, we're going to do this. And for a lot of kids, they would not be able to handle that last minute change, the springing it on them. And so I totally get that. For my kiddo, he has a really hard time saving the day when it changes at the last minute, right? And we have found that we're significantly more likely to have those things get canceled in the last minute. And so I'm hedging my bets, right? With the like, no one's sick, everything's okay, can still drive us, so like, hey, guess what? We're going to do this. And then we have the flexibility, right? We can be flexible. And so he knows he doesn't have to worry like, oh, I can't get this done and I have this and I'm not, like, how's it? Like, it's okay. We're going to shift everything so we can do this fun thing. Whereas if we used to try it. I used to do it that like in the morning, like, oh, I'm really sorry. Your best friend's sick, can't do a play date. And it was like your day was off the rails anyway, because the disappointment was so huge and it was so hard to kind of get back. So then you're like scrambling at the last minute to come up with something fun to do to replace the thing. And it's still not as fun, but you tried to make it better. It's like, yeah.
So I was laughing when you said that because when she talked about the trip and showing the kid like pictures and all that stuff. So I totally made homemade vacation brochures for my oldest kiddo when he was younger. We needed to do that for him to feel comfortable going into a trip. And he had to be able to pack one backpack with comfort items. It was like a whole thing. But it's funny. So last week I talked about the fact like his confidence level blossomed when we just let him be who he is. And he just owns the things that what most of society would consider shortcomings, right? And so we tend to go on these really big trips. We used to spend all summer going cross country in our camper van and we would have a whole itinerary and the kids would be involved in making the itinerary. There would be printed maps and agendas and whiteboards and they got to say, hey, we've done too many caves. We're over caves. Can we scratch the cave? Right. And it's true. Caves do start to look alike after a while. Like, so I was like, yeah, no problem. And so we would kind of do all that. And so he was involved in all of this and had full say. He would literally get in the van and have no clue where we were going. Like he just, it didn't stick. He didn't get it. And so it was funny because one year we set out on our epic road trip and we were planning my daughter was going to a weaving conference and then we were going up to the Upper Peninsula in Michigan. And my husband called me 48 hours into our trip and was like, I've just been transferred. Like, I need you to scrap your trip. I need you to go where we're moving. I need you to find a neighborhood. And then I need you to come home and prep the house for sale. Of course, no problem. Like, of course, that's what I'll do. Right. And it was so funny because I sit them down and my oldest was like, I still didn't even know where we were going. So he's like, I'm totally fine with the fact that the plan changed. And it cracks me up because like from a personality perspective, I can't imagine just like getting in the car and having no clue what the plan is and where you're going. And he's totally fine with it. He's just like, I'm here. Tell me what to do. Like whatever.
Should be interesting.
It's right. It's like, it's so funny to me, And he's like, did we not go to Michigan? I'm so confused. Like, and he just owns it. And I've bought him some t-shirts. Like sometimes Facebook will like show them to me because I've bought other ones. But I mean, he's got one that's like wildly unprepared for the day ahead. And I'm like, it suits his personality to a T. And he's just like, I'm good. I go with it. It's fine. And somehow he makes it work. It's that like, it seems to happen. He seems to get done what needs to get done. I don't know how he does it, but he does.
All right. So then that brings us to the kind of one of the last comments on page 154. The section is called Adapt Your Language So They Can Understand You. And she says, quote, I know many families who put their family policies in writing, family rules, daily schedules, screen time guidelines, chore lists, routine schedules, and more. Some even type up contracts that are signed by all parties involved. And I was like, man, we actually really do very little of this, which is kind of ironic since I do a ton of record keeping with what we actually like achieved during school. But as far as like family policies or chore lists or guidelines or anything like we just don't put it in writing. Like we don't make vision boards, we don't put things in writing. Like I don't know, we use a lot of gentlemen's agreements or something. I don't really know what's happening around here. I was curious. I feel like this is something you guys probably do.
Not really. We did have a chore whiteboard for a while, but it was mainly just because I could never remember who was on which chore because we had a rotation. And I'll be very honest, and this is a very privileged statement. I realized when we read a book in our other book club that Amanda and I are in offline called Raising a Good Adult or Raising Good Adults or something. I was like, my kids have chores, of course. And then she started giving examples in that book of all the things that your kids, quote unquote, should know how to do when they launch into the real world, or at this age, they can take this on and that on. And I realized from a very privileged perspective that we were paying people to do most of those things. We had a housekeeper, we had a landscaper, we had a pool person, we had somebody who picked up dog poop in the backyard. So really, we only had 3 chores, which I realized was really pathetic when I read that book. And they were dishwasher, garbage, and counters and floors. And so we had a rotation. It would change every Monday. And then eventually between them, like they all realized they had one job that they detested. And so they came to this agreement that they would rather have fixed chores. So they stopped rotating.
Mm.
So there was no need for the whiteboard anymore. But it was interesting because my kids took a class at Williamsburg Academy, which used to be a lot more hippie, flowy, child-led, interest-led. And then in the pandemic, they got a little bit more like buckle down schooly. And so we left. But um, they did at the beginning of the semester, they would do contracts, student and parent contracts, and you had to submit them. And so there was some stuff in there that was like, they would give you a template and it would say like, if this doesn't get done, then that. And I rewrote ours on the template and was like, I don't care and stick my children. They just get done what needs to get done and they know what their responsibilities are and they do it. Right. And I'm not going to punish them if something came up in life because they were sick or a friend came in from out of town and they said, hey, do you mind if I do this in a few days instead? And I'm like, of course not. That's life. And so I just like rewrote ours and submitted it. And I was like, stuff will get done without the carrot and the stick. It's fine. So yeah, we're definitely, I don't think those people at all actually, but we do love a vision board, as you know.
And that's it. I'm kind of surprised that you don't have more written. I know you don't like the contract thing. I know we've talked about that before, but I could totally see like because you have so many family meetings where you all get on the same page, like that's a big thing. And so I could just see like one of your kids is like taking the notes and like this is what we talked about and this is what we agreed on.
No, maybe I should. Maybe my kiddo would have known we were going to Michigan. I don't know. Like
At least sketch note it, man.
I mean, I usually like when we would do our road trip planning, I would have like handouts with maps so that they could kind of plot where things are, which I learned because when we were planning early on. So it was a road trip for 2018. So my youngest would have been 7-ish. I think he was actually 6, like about to turn 7. And we were sitting having a planning meeting, big whiteboard, the whole thing, like everybody can throw out ideas and we would put stuff on the whiteboard and then we would see what worked and what didn't. And he would throw ideas out and he wanted to see the Eiffel Tower and he wanted to float in the Dead Sea and he wanted to see if he could float a bowling ball in the Dead Sea. And I was like, we're going to like Wyoming. Yeah, like, that's not going to work. And I'll never forget, he stomped up the stairs. He got so upset and he goes, no one likes my ideas. And he stormed off. And it's like, it is not my fault that the Eiffel Tower is not there. Ironically, that summer we did end up in Vegas and they have the itty bitty Eiffel Tower
Right.
there. So we made it work, right?
Mhm.
And he has since seen the Eiffel Tower. He still has yet to float a bowling ball in the Dead Sea because every time I try to plan a trip there, shit gets real there. And we haven't been able to make that happen. Someday he will float a bowling ball in the Dead Sea. So then I learned from that experience that I started printing maps so that we could plot things. And that if somebody suggested something that wasn't viable, it wasn't me saying, no, we can't go see the Eiffel Tower. It was like, oh, do you see on the map how that's like not entirely feasible? And so there's usually like a handout and stuff like that, but everybody's free to kind of do their own thing. It's like a hippie commune, right? Like it's all just everybody comes and brings their stuff to the table
Oh,
and we
no.
part ways.
I'm not handing out except unless I've bought it off Teachers Pay Teachers and I could just hand it to it. I'm like, I'm not putting that. That's not happening. That's like a level of energy I don't have. But again, good for you. To each their own. We each do it how it works for us. But okay, so that pretty much wraps up this tilt. There's again the Start Now box on 155. And it says, when your child does something that elicits a strong negative response in you, commit to respectfully asking them why they made that choice. Or use the question Anders shared in his story, what were you trying to do? And then actually listen to their answer with an open mind. And then add whatever you learn to your personal translation dictionary that Meagan had kind of referenced it. When I do this, they feel this, or when they're doing this, it means they need this. Yeah.
I
So
like it.
yeah. So you'll not be surprised that we only made it to 2 of the 3 tilts. We're at an hour, a little over an hour. We have some editing to do, so it shouldn't be a massive episode, but it'll definitely be a massive episode if we go ahead and do this last tilt. So we made 6 and 7. There we go. And we can copy and paste 8 into next week's notes. It'll be just fine.
Listen, we just did an episode on what to do if you haven't finished the curriculum at the end of the year. And we talked about the fact that as long as you are making steady forward progress, no matter how slow it is, that is acceptable. And that's what we're doing.
Yep. We're walking the talk, right? There we go. We're doing it. Or some other sports metaphor I'm sure is out there that if either one of us were sports ball people, we could totally rock that. Okay, so one last super important thing before we wrap up. If you are a book club groupie, but you don't typically listen to our main topic episode that comes through on Tuesdays, you are 1000% going to want to just back up an episode. The one just before this one in the queue, we were honored to have interviewed Debbie Reber, the author of this book, Differently Wired. And that episode just aired the other day. So definitely go back, give it a listen. We had a really meaningful conversation with her, and we hope you'll enjoy it. So, with that said, that wraps us up for this week. And yeah, we'll be back next week with Tilt 8 and hopefully 9, maybe 10. We'll see. Who knows? But in the meantime, happy homeschooling.
Have a great day.